Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. And for all of you tuning in from Quebec, still hello. Learn to speak Canadian, won't you? I kid. But seriously, yeah, hi. Anyway, it is so great to have you joining me on the program this afternoon from coast to coast to coast and all around the world, live on TheRebel.media. I mean, not live, but you know what? I'm live right now when I'm talking about it. We have a great show up ahead. We're dealing with less than 6 weeks to go until the federal election, so the political excitement is building up, and we've got one more long weekend to go before the election. So that's how I try to measure things now because of how much I end up having to work. I'm going to talk about a little bit of election stuff later on, but it's not going to be the focal point of this show. But we do have a lot of good stuff coming up, so you don't want to miss this program right up until the end. But I do want to start off talking about two unrelated stories that share what I believe is somewhat of a common thread, which is this idea of religious liberty, religious freedom, and this idea of freedom from discrimination. Now, both of these are very misunderstood, very often cited by people that don't understand what they're actually talking about. And both of them are, for different reasons, incredibly relevant this week. One example of this that is, I would assume, not foreign to anyone right now is the incarceration and release of Kim Davis, the Kentucky County Clerk, who is basically one of the only people in the United States of America that doesn't accept the Supreme Court's ruling that states can't ban gays from getting married. The other is another woman who has received far less coverage, far less attention, and in the grand scheme of things is far less of a martyr for a cause or an attempted martyr for a cause than Kim Davis is. But her name is Cherie Stanley. Now, Cherie Stanley is a flight attendant with ExpressJet, which is an airline in Atlanta. And she has, in her own Kim Davis-esque fashion, been attempting to stick up for her religious beliefs recently as well, but it got her suspended from her job. Now, she doesn't work for the government. She's not dealing with something here where there has been a constitutional precedent, nor will they. But they're both the same if you look at what the actual demand they are making is, or at least the nature of it. Cherie Stanley was a flight attendant. She got hired a few years ago, and in the time since she was hired has converted to Islam. She has the right to do that. I obviously theologically, as a Christian, think she's wrong, but you know what? She's found faith. Good for her. The fact is, the Muslim faith prohibits its members, its adherents, from drinking alcohol. And obviously, no religion wants to see other people being sent down the road of sin as well. So the Muslim faith also, depending on your denomination or your sect of Islam, prevents you from facilitating someone else's consumption of alcohol. And this is how Cherie Stanley has endeared herself in my podcast lineup for today, because she has decided that she is going to demand, not ask, but demand religious accommodation in her job and say that she can't serve alcohol to customers on the flights that she's working because of her religion. Now, a little while ago, she asked for this accommodation on June 1st, as a matter of fact. Her employer said, work it out with other flight attendants. And since June, she has. Other flight attendants have said, fine, I'll bring the customer the alcohol, and that's about it. And ultimately, it took one employee who said, no, I'm not comfortable with this. She needs to do her job. So that employee complained, and all of a sudden, it was brought back to Ms. Stanley. They said, okay, now that you can't obviously work with other flight attendants on this, will you serve alcohol? She said no, so they suspended her. They put her on administrative leave. And the 40-year-old woman has been working there for 3 years. and only this year decided that she was going to convert to Islam and not be able to deliver alcohol to passengers. Now, this strikes me as a pretty inconsequential story in the grand scheme of things. You know what? A woman doesn't want to do a part of her job. She asks for an accommodation. Employer says no. She gets suspended. I would say fire her if she can't do the job, but that's neither here nor there. But enter the age of the outraged. She's procured or at least received for free assistance from an attorney with the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE. Her lawyer, Lena Masri, says, quote, no one should have to choose between their religion and their career, unquote. She also said that employers must, quote, provide a safe environment where employees can feel they can practice their religion freely, unquote. The other employee has said that the arrangement has worked beautifully. She said that the person who complained was an Islamophobe. Didn't like that Stanley had a Quran, didn't like that Miss Stanley wore a headscarf, regardless of whether or not the other colleague who complained is Islamophobic or not, doesn't matter. She was hired to do a job which, because of her religion, she can no longer do. And I see similarities between this and Davis. Now, look, I'm a Christian. I am one of these people who recognizes that my beliefs do not result in a demand that the state accommodate them. I believe in a complete removal of the state from marriage. So when you're talking about the issue of gay marriage, I don't believe in government-sanctioned gay marriage. I also don't believe in government-sanctioned straight marriage. I think that the Catholic Church should be able to decide for itself, free from the intervention of the state, who it will marry. I believe the United Church of Canada can decide for itself who will be marryable. I believe that Sunni Islam should be able to decide for itself. Orthodox Judaism, and so on and so forth. You know, this is the most peaceful form of coexistence you'll ever find, this libertarian-esque view that people can do whatever they darn well please. And I realize now that that's more of a utopian ideal than a practical belief system about how Canada can be. But hey, a guy can dream, right? So I believe that the state should be completely separate from the church when we are dealing with the definition of what marriage is. If it's simply about tax benefits, give gays the same rights that straights have. I don't think that Canada has seen a cultural implosion in any way since giving gays the right to marry. I don't think that the U.S. is going to see it as well. So my position on same-sex marriage is, to put it perfectly candidly, one of apathy more than anything else. I've never understood why it was a huge issue. I've never thought it's worth fighting a war over. And I think the fact that even the most strict of Canadians who oppose gay marriage have shut up on the matter seems to think that most people realize this is not an issue worth fighting on. Now, the U.S., I think, is culturally in the same boat. Culturally, the United States has acknowledged that this battle has been fought and lost. But politically, there are those who hold out. There are the Mike Huckabees who have been standing next to Kim Davis and ultimately saying that the government should be subservient not to the Constitution, but to God. Now, I am not at all, and I want to make this abundantly clear, and by the way, I like Mike Huckabee, but I'm not comparing Christianity to Islam. But I saw a meme on Facebook this week, and I'm regretting even saying this, but I'm saying this knowing that I'm talking to an audience that understands me, I'm hoping, and understands where I'm coming from here. I saw a meme that put a picture of Mike Huckabee beside a picture of Anjem Choudhury, the radical imam from the UK. And it's a quote by Mike Huckabee talking about the fact that God is the one who is basically the author of laws in the United States. And then it said that in Imam Anjem Choudhury, it quoted him saying that there should be Sharia law and that Allah is the only arbiter of what should be legal. And the person was trying to basically make Mike Huckabee seem like a kook. And they were saying, how are these men any different? To be honest, when push comes to shove, I think they're incredibly different. But when you're dealing with a legal argument, they're both the same. It is no different for a Christian to say that my laws come from God than it is for a Muslim evangelist to say, my laws come from Allah. They are fundamentally the same. You can look at the Christian roots of a country. You can look at the Christian roots of the United States of America and, to a lesser extent, but still the roots of Canada, and say that it's a country founded by Christians. You can say that it's a country founded on Judeo-Christian values, and you're not wrong. But I also think that we need to recognize that we should be instead preserving and protecting the rights of everyone and encouraging culturally Judeo-Christian morality, not legally. And I think this is why we on the right, especially if you're a member of the Christian right, have lost so many of these battles because we've been fighting them in the wrong place. Try to impact culture. Don't try to impact the legal system when the courts are stacked against this idea that the state should have moral values in any way. Now, I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent there, but it's a relevant one because I think it touches on the bigger picture of what the Kim Davis case exemplifies here, which is that people are defending her. And by the way, most people aren't. Even most Christian conservatives I know are condemning her. But most of the people who are defending her are doing it because they agree with her decision. Not because they're looking at the juxtaposition of her in that position making that decision. And this is a fundamentally different question because she is no different than a Muslim clerk saying, I will not allow someone to get a pork processing license because she believes that eating pork is wrong. It is no different than a fisheries and wildlife officer saying, I will not issue hunting permits because I am a vegan. I saw a meme about that the other day. They are all the same way, which is an employee of the government imposing their personal view, not just on their own job, but on other people. When you're the only one that can make a certain decision, you don't get to tell people that a legal decision is not within their rights. I'm not denying that the gay lobby, not gay people, but the gay lobby has been in a lot of ways incredibly unreasonable in the last year. When you look at their relentless campaigns against Christian bakery owners, when you're dealing with a case of someone operating a private business, making a decision to serve or not serve someone else. I agree, by the way, that a Christian baker should have the right to decide not to bake a cake for a gay couple. I believe that a gay baker should have the right to decide not to make a cake for a Christian that says Leviticus 18:22 on it. I believe that a Jewish baker should have the right to not bake a Nazi cake. Am I quoting Leviticus with Nazism? No. Am I equating Nazism with being gay? Absolutely not. I'm talking about personal people having the right to their own conscience if they run a business, if they own a business, in their day-to-day lives. When you are an agent of the government, the rules are very different. When you are an agent of the government, you have to decide for yourself what you believe in. And I'm not saying you need to leave your religion at the door, but you need to recognize when your job expects you to perform a certain duty. And you need to darn well do it. Kim Davis has been, at this point, released from jail. Will she go back? I don't know. She seems to be pretty defiant, but at the end of the day, there will be a point, I'm going to say within at least a week, where people stop caring. All her support dries up. She finds herself in jail. No one's given her the money for her legal defense. And she's going to have to recognize at some point to either quit her job or change the way she does it. I think that the attention has turned her into a martyr. A lot of people have focused on her past, her divorces, etc., and pointed to a level of hypocrisy. Look, I believe that being a Christian is transformative. I believe that you are, as a Christian, cleansed of your sins. So if she has come to terms with her past marital record, that's her business, not mine. But I think she's a prime example of why no one should judge. She's also a prime example of how dishonest the media is. You don't see much reporting on the fact that Kim Davis is, contrary to what a lot of people are assuming, not even a conservative. She's a Democrat. So people are talking about the fact that she's been married multiple times. No one's talking about the fact that she is a Democrat. And let's face it, the Democrats were far bigger opponents going back 50 plus years to the civil rights movement than were the Republicans. Now, that's not to say that there weren't racist Republicans and Democrats who love blacks, same as it's not to say now that there aren't obviously factions within the Democrat Party that are more supportive of the advance of gay rights than there are in the Republican Party. But she doesn't even fit into the narrative that people want her to fit into, which I find really amusing. Look, I mean, the Washington Post held a whole panel. They had a Q&A of people talking about why it's not relevant that she's a Democrat. They're saying, well, no, but being a Democrat in Kentucky means something different. Trying to downplay the fact that she's actually a leftist that believes the state gets to control the decisions that you make. And that's basically what she's doing here. This has nothing to do with her religion. We should be, as conservatives, more unhappy that she is subverting the right of individual people and utilizing a government office to do it. I think conservatives should be more pissed off at her than liberals should be. And I mean that sincerely, because this is a woman that is denying people freedom. Forget about the fact that she is denying a marriage license to a gay couple, who, by the way, got the license after all. And it was hard for me to not be moved by the video of them in tears when they got that license from the poor fill-in clerk after Kim Davis was jailed. I felt bad for him, but you know what? He gets the permit, he shakes their hand, he goes back to work, doesn't talk to media, lets them do it, and it was over with. So what I find interesting here, profoundly interesting, is how much the left wants to focus on Kim Davis. The left has won the gay marriage battle. The left has won the gay marriage battle culturally. They've won the gay marriage battle legally. The fact that every single person in the United States of America, except for a couple of gay people in Kentucky, can get married, and they're still focusing on Kim Davis, is laughable. Is the left this eager to create for itself a martyr complex that they're literally flogging the one dead horse left in this argument in an attempt to make conservative Christian Republicans look to be the bad guys, when she's not even a conservative nor a Republican? I can't speak to her faith or not. But this is what the left is doing. They're trying to prop up the opposition that at this point politically doesn't even really exist. Not in any sort of meaningful or substantive way, anyway. You know, an interesting aside from this actually came, and I can't believe that I'm going to quote Madonna's brother here. Madonna, the pop singer's brother, Christopher Ciccone, an openly gay man who has actually written in defense of Kim Davis. I want to give the other side of this here because I find it interesting. He writes, "The county clerk in Kentucky deserves about as much support as you would if you were a Muslim woman who insisted on covering her face and refused not only gay marriage licenses, but divorce, accusations of rape, and driving a car without your man's approval. Perspective is everything. The woman is a civil servant. She is required to follow federal law, but why should she? When DOJ and other civil authorities don't follow federal law when they choose not to. This is why we have elections. If the folks in Kentucky don't want her as a county clerk, don't vote for her. This is how democracy works, not to mention the courts. In the meantime, since when are we the arbiters of other people's faith? If I'm not mistaken, it's in the Constitution. Something about religious freedom or something. Selective shame corrupts a democracy. Freedom of press, speech, and religion give it strength." Now, he updated this a few times between 12:51 a.m. earlier this weekend and 6:11 a.m. He updated it a lot of times. That was from the original that I just read. I wanted to read an add-on in the latest version of this. He talks about sanctuary cities. He talks about pot laws. When he's talking about faith, he says, "Can you honestly say that you know how much faith a person is allowed to have?" The gay community feels the need to be sore winners. Is it so difficult to allow this woman her religion, or must we destroy her in order for her to betray her faith, no matter how we judge its truth? The rights we have all fought for mean nothing if we deny her hers. Look, I disagree completely with what she's doing, but I find it refreshing that someone is calling out the sore winner mentality that's plaguing those in the gay marriage debate here, who are insisting on bringing a woman into this debate, despite the fact that even people on what conventionally anyway, or ostensibly would be, quote, her own side, have already cast her aside as well. Why is she somehow relevant when we look at the evolution of this debate? So the reason I'm bringing this up is, first off, just because I find it amusing. I know the left's heads were exploding. Oh, no, what do we do when a gay man and a relative of a beloved pop star, well, not beloved, but Madonna anyway, is coming to the defense of Kim Davis? But I wanted to bring it back to the point I raised earlier on at the top of the segment in the discussion about Shari Stanley, the ExpressJet flight attendant. There is a difference, a fundamental difference between someone who works for the government expecting to have their religious views accommodated and someone in the private sector. My opinion on religious freedom in the private sector has always been a constant, which is, you know what? If the employer wants to accommodate, great. If not, get a new job. There are degrees of this. What happens if you're an air traffic controller, someone on whom countless people's lives are dependent, and you say, oh, wait, I have to take my eyes off the job that I'm doing right now and pray 5 times a day facing Mecca? Well, there's an example where your religious freedom might need to be in some ways amended to fit the duties of your job description. What happens if a man was working at a pork slaughterhouse and then converted to Islam or Judaism and said, wait, I can't process pork anymore? Should they work around him or say, hey, I think it's time that you go somewhere else? What happens if a Christian who doesn't believe on working Sundays expects to get a job working as a weekend security guard at the mall and they need to work Sundays as well? Well, look, my heart goes out to you, but hey, you got to find a new job. There are limits to what accommodation can be, which is why in the private sector, it should be entirely based on contracts. You as an employee have to advocate for yourself. Your employer has to advocate for themselves, and you have to find a way that you can work with them. In most cases, you could work around it, but no one under any circumstances should be holding a gun to a job creator's head and saying, you must do things this way because I am demanding it. And that's what's happening with Shari Stanley and ExpressJet. It's also what's happening with Kim Davis. She's holding a gun to the heads of the people in her county. It's not like they can just go to the next wicket over. So when we look at Kim Davis, when we look at the broader question of religious freedom in government employees, is it expected that people leave their religion at the door? I think it depends entirely on the job. You know, one example that we've actually been faced with in Canada on a couple of occasions is that of the religious views of doctors. Are doctors entitled to have their own religious beliefs and exercise them? One classic example of this, a prime example that's come up recently, not just in Ontario, but also in Alberta, has been whether or not doctors have the right for religious grounds to not prescribe patients with birth control pills. And, you know, I have always defended doctors who don't want to do this here. I've said, you know, in most cases, birth control pills are not a medical necessity. Family doctors are in private practice. No doctor should be forced to prescribe you something that is not medically essential. And secondly, if people have an issue with the fact that all doctors are funded publicly, I say change the healthcare system. Don't use that as an excuse to force religious doctors to comply. And the same goes with abortions. Should any doctor be forced to offer abortion procedures if there is not a medical need, an imminent medical need, on the part of the mother who wants to receive the abortion or who has to, in her eyes, receive the abortion? And I think most people believe that you should not be forced to abandon your religion. It comes down to when your religion is hindering the rights of others and when taxpayers are paying for it. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So yeah, I realize there is an inherent level of criticism that one could level at the argument of doctors not being forced, in my eyes, or should not be being forced, rather, in my eyes, to prescribe birth control. And I say the way you deal with that is force doctors who want to practice based on their religious beliefs to go into a private practice that is privately funded. Since the system doesn't allow it, I don't think we can be laying on restrictions on what doctors can and can't do when they have the autonomy over their patients, not people getting to go in and just say, hey, I want this and this and this and this. That's not why you go to a doctor. They are supposed to be anyway, and I realize there may be exceptions to this rule, the experts. So when we are looking at the broader question of religious freedoms, there is that old saying that your rights end where someone else's begins. Your right to extend your arm ends where my face began. I know I'm butchering the wording of that, but you know the sentiment behind it. So what is the answer? How do you find that balance? Look at what guarantees the greatest number of freedoms to the greatest number of people. Look at, and I think this is one that I always use when I'm addressing any new issue or trying to delve into what I think or feel about a particular issue. Look at which is the one that allows for the optimal amount of choice, or the greatest amount of choice. And I've looked at the question here, which is one of the most now cited examples of this, gay wedding cake Christian baker. Most bakers I know are probably more gay than they are Christian, first off. But secondly, most Christians I know wouldn't really care. They'd say, you know what, it's your business, it's your cake, it's my business, it's your cake. Doesn't really matter what I feel about your marriage, I'll do it. But here's the bigger problem that I have, which is that if we say that the Christian baker is allowed to deny the business, no one's rights are being denied. That gay wedding couple can still go somewhere else and buy another cake. But if you say that the baker is forced to make the cake, there is nothing else that baker can do. You are taking away their choice, taking away their freedoms, regardless of whether or not you agree with their religion or agree with the decision that they were trying to make in the first place. Well, it may be an inconvenience or even a slight imposition to allow someone the right to deny business to someone else. It is not a violation of their rights, like it is when you force someone to bake a cake. Give people the right to choose, and things will work out pretty well. But it brings us around to an even bigger problem, and a much more grave problem, which is that no longer do we accept tolerance as being laudable. We no longer as a society accept that a Christian baker will, even out of fear of what would happen, bake the cake anyway just to get rid of the problem. No, now they need to give it for free. They need to put a banner up in front of their business that say, we bake gay wedding cakes. It is no longer enough to tolerate. One must celebrate. And I think that is why there is so much, relatively speaking, I know it's not a big number, but of the support that is there for Kim Davis, I think that's why. Because people, especially now more than any time before, on cultural issues and moral issues like this, resent the idea that they have to do anything. People resent the idea that they can be forced to do something, even if in this case they do, in fact, agree fundamentally with the idea of these freedoms. There's a fear that what will happen when I don't. It's like that old first they came for the and so on and so forth. And by the time they came for me, there was no one else left. That's why people are fearful now. Because they don't know when the tides are going to turn and all of a sudden their lifestyle is the one in the crosshairs of the politically correct mobs. We got to take a quick break here. When we come back, more Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
We are back here on Lawton Online. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about something that, by the way, is a bold departure from what we were talking about in the last segment with a heavier subject that was religious freedom and whatnot. I wanted to talk about James Bond. I know, far more important and, frankly, far more staying power I think James Bond has than Kim Davis, certainly. But it's the increasing political correctnessization, if you will, and I know it's not a word, but bear with me here, of Hollywood in general, but even James Bond. And it's not a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise anyway, that James Bond has fallen victim to what most of Hollywood has fallen victim to as well in recent years. But I think there were a lot of people that thought even Bond would have been sacred. You know, every couple of years, every time a new James Bond movie comes out, there's always a little bit of a rehashing of the same old tropes that, James Bond's a misogynist and James Bond is sexist and classist and all these other things. But it always seems to go away and doesn't really gain any traction. Unfortunately, that time is coming to an end. Now, there are a couple of topics that are all connected to the same issue here. A few weeks ago, as a matter of fact, we saw what happened when the official James Bond author, Anthony Horowitz, was speaking about who he thought should portray James Bond in the next movie. A lot of people don't realize this, that James Bond books are still being written. I think most people realize that the series was rooted in novels by Sir Ian Fleming, but now they're still being written, although the Fleming estate has chosen new authors from time to time, the most recent of whom is Anthony Horowitz. Now, Horowitz was speaking about who should succeed Daniel Craig as the next James Bond after Spectre is released. And one of the things that was interesting about the last year or so is that we've seen speculation that the new James Bond will be black, the first black James Bond. And in the Sony email hacking, one of the Sony executives had said maybe Idris Elba, who's the black British actor known most importantly for playing Luther in that series, would be a good contender. Now, Elba has said, I've heard now, and I haven't looked into this too closely, that he's not necessarily interested in it, although he initially made jokes and said, if they asked him, he'd consider it. When posed with the question of whether or not Idris Elba should be the next James Bond, a lot of people have said, well, I don't think there can be a black James Bond. Most people tend to agree that Elba himself is a great actor. Now, Anthony Horowitz, the Bond author, was asked about the next James Bond. And he said that he didn't think Idris Elba was the right choice. You see, Anthony Horowitz is a raging racist. He hates all black people. He doesn't actually, but I think that's what the left would have you believe about him. He was asked by Variety in Britain whether or not, or I guess not whether or not, but who should be the next James Bond. And he was talking about Elba, who's been considered a favorite, and he said, quote, Idris Elba is a terrific actor, but I can think of other black actors who would do it better. He named British actor Adrian Lester, who's black, as an example. He said, quote, for me, Idris Elba is a bit too rough to play the part. It's not a color issue. I think he is probably a bit too street for Bond. Is it a question of being suave? Yeah. Now, when you hear that in context, it's not really that outrageous. He says, well, Idris Elba's too street, a little bit too gritty, too rough. He thinks there are other actors to be there. He says it's not a color issue, and as his recommendation of Adrian Lester would suggest, it clearly isn't a color issue. But the excerpt of the interview created a firestorm in which people were only sharing that Horowitz said Idris Elba was too street, to play James Bond and not suave enough. Everyone said, oh, what? Black people are on the street. Oh, what? Black people can't be suave. And this became the biggest story of the week in terms of Hollywood circles. And I felt bad for Horowitz. I felt bad for Horowitz because here's a guy that has just welcomed to the fold of how media works, where if you do not toe the party line and talk about how great it is and how there should be a black, gay, transgender Bond, you are clearly a racist, homophobe, sexist, transphobe, etc. It wasn't even what he meant. It wasn't even that he said the wrong thing. It was that people only quoted him on a part of his comments. So he had to put out last week a clarifying statement. He said in a picture that he posted to Twitter, quote, "I'm really sorry. My comments about Idris Elba have caused offense. That wasn't my intention. I was asked in my interview if Idris Elba would make a good James Bond. In my article, I expressed the opinion that, to my mind, Adrian Lester would be a better choice. But I'm a writer, not a casting director, so what do I know? Clumsily, I chose the word street as Elba's gritty portrayal of DCI John Luther was in my mind, but I admit it was a poor choice of word. I am mortified to have caused offense." This is the guy that I don't think owes an apology, but he clearly wanted to make the problem go away. And I think for the most part it does. Most sensible people have recognized that he was not actually a racist, but still, the social media mob is unwieldy on this. And what I find hilarious is that this came just a few days before it was revealed that the latest James Bond book, penned by Horowitz himself, has been a foray into political correctness. So now I don't even want to sympathize with the author anymore. A piece in the UK Telegraph that came out earlier this week has talked about the fact that James Bond is now basically a victim of the PC brigades. Now he has a live-in girlfriend. There are warnings of smoking causing cancer now. And also, he has an outspoken gay best friend. Yeah. The book is called Trigger Mortis. Horowitz has said he's tried to preserve elements of who James Bond was and in ensuring the 1950s attitudes remained intact, but he's brought in a new cast of characters to point out the error, according to the Telegraph, of Bond's chauvinistic ways. He's surrounded by women who give him a run for his money, an outspoken gay friend, and people warning him that his smoking is unhealthy. I'm pretty sure if James Bond stops for a Big Mac in this book, someone will slap that out of her hands as well and say, you're setting a bad message for children, and that can cause childhood obesity. It's like those old, Batman public service announcements. We're going to basically be seeing stuff like that. So now Pussy Galore and James Bond are actually living together and have morning squabblings. It's the first time that a Bond storyline has actually revolved around a Bond girl, so the book itself is moving in a more PC direction. She does more than simply serve as his conquest, if you will. And they're living together. They have little quibbles over eggs. And this is a quote from the book, "An uneasy silence full of dark thoughts and words unsaid." So yes, even James Bond has to deal with the perils of not knowing how to keep his woman happy at home. But the fact is, and this is something that I was reading about Horowitz saying he needed to overcome, is that Pussy Galore was apparently a lesbian originally. So he said that now he's had to change this attitude. But the fact that now this question of identity politics is playing in so heavily to something that has always been about a suave, debonair, badass socialite who fights spies from around the world in a tuxedo and wins when he's up against impeccably terrible odds. The fact that that has now been sullied in the name of the Hollywood PC agenda is disturbing. Now, Horowitz is saying that he's still trying to keep Bond as he is. He still smokes cigarettes. He smokes many cigarettes, according to Horowitz. He still tries to look at women with a carnal attitude. But now he's changing the world around Bond in such a way that people try to remind him how terrible his lifestyle is. I just have to yawn. Now, I haven't read any of the James Bond books in quite a while. I read a couple of the originals years ago. I've been more partial to the films themselves. I think they're entertaining. You know, I realize that this may make me unpopular in a lot of circles. I was actually quite partial to the Timothy Dalton years, and I realized that was only 2 movies, but I thought Timothy Dalton made a great Bond. But I realized that not everyone will have agreed with that. There are some people that have forgotten that George Lazenby even was a James Bond, going back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And even though the movies have taken a different tone from the Sean Connery days to the Roger Moore days to the Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig days, etc., there has always been a prevailing attitude, which was who James Bond has been pretty unchanging. And yes, there has been development in the world around him, which is what Horowitz is trying to encapsulate here. But as my colleague Rick McGinnis, editor of the Megaphone, wrote on Facebook when I drew this to his attention, because he's a big Bond fan, he wrote, I won't use the exact words, even though it's a podcast. I still try to avoid, foul language when I can. But he said, is the new Bond car going to be a blanking Prius? And frankly, I'm guessing that's where we're headed now. He's going to switch to a solar-powered or electric-powered car now, and presumably he's only going to use strong language to stop criminals in their tracks, never a firearm. And I'm sure his tuxedos are going to be only fair trade or organically grown, non-sweatshop tuxedos, nothing made in China, of course, because this is now the priority of James Bond. He has to be the worldly man, the Bono of super spies. Like I said before, yawn. So I don't even know if I can read. I won't read the book now because I'm just too frustrated by it. I'll still watch the movies because I get the directors and producers have their own vision that exists irrespective of the visions of people like the authors of the books. But you have to expect that if the Fleming estate is looking for someone that's going to take on this vision with the book, that they're looking for the films to go a specific route as well. So I don't know how close the estate of Ian Fleming is to the narratives in the films. This is something that I don't know about and I haven't studied, but will certainly be very, very interesting to see, if for no other reason than to realize whether this is yet another film series that I can cast aside for sullying and diluting its own message. We've got to take a quick break here. When we come back in just a couple of moments, more Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. Stay tuned.
He's irreverent, intelligent, and indefatigable. You're tuned in to Lawton Online with Andrew Lawton.
We are back here on Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. So last week on the show, you will have heard me, I certainly hope, if not, go back and take a listen, I won't hold it against you, to a discussion I had with Lenore Skenazy about the Wonder Woman lunchbox that was deemed to be just too offensive, sexist, and too violent for a school in the United States. And I posted this on Facebook. I ended up writing something about it over at the Megaphone blog on The Rebel, and I had a few people that were outraged by it, a few people that were more in the place that I was on it, which is, this is terrifying, it's amusing, but I wish this didn't happen so often. And I'm finding that this is an increasingly common refrain, because we find it to be no longer uncommon when someone is facing the blows of political correctness. You know, we were talking about one example in the last segment about Idris Elba, James Bond, and the new version, or if you will, of the new version of James Bond in the new novel. And again, it comes down to a fact that this is no longer surprising. We can roll our eyes, discuss it, analyze it, parse it, fight back, but at the end of the day, this is the world in which we live. And it's a difficult balancing act for me. Because on one hand, I want to come up with issues that are illustrative of society to talk about, and issues that I think present the problem and challenge and frankly, discussion that society needs to have. And one of those is one that I find to be incredibly relevant, which is political correctness. But I don't want to bring it to the point where it becomes cliched, where the stories are just so problematic in addressing or demonstrating this dog bites man attitude of reporting something that isn't even news anymore. So not every week will have it. Not every day will have it. But if I wanted to, I could find every single day another one of these examples. And this one this week, very different from the Wonder Woman case, because this is an example of someone taking advantage of the political correctness culture and trying to advance their own views and career as a result of it. And it is something that takes place in the United Kingdom, where a 27-year-old has basically open-fired on a 57-year-old lawyer because of what she says is indicative of a rampant and disgusting sexism that she should not have to deal with. Yeah. Wait till you hear what it is, though. The case is a LinkedIn exchange where, all massive international news stories happen. A LinkedIn exchange between 57-year-old lawyer Alexander Carter Silk, or barrister as they call them in the UK, and 27-year-old lawyer and PhD student Charlotte Proudman. Charlotte Proudman was given a message, sent a message on LinkedIn, a social media site that apparently people still use, by Mr. Carter Silk, in which he said something that I do not understand the offense of. I want to understand it, but I don't understand it. He writes, Charlotte, delighted to connect. Appreciate that this is probably horrendously politically incorrect, but that is a stunning picture. You definitely win the prize for best LinkedIn picture I have seen. Always interested to understand people's skills and how we might work together. Alex. He's trying to be friendly. He's trying to be cordial. He's trying to introduce himself. Is he trying to be a dirty old pervert? I don't know. He's 57. She's 27. I don't know what his intentions are. I don't find it to be anything over the top, though. Her response, on the other hand, is incredibly over the top. She writes, Alex, I find your message offensive. I'm on LinkedIn for business purposes, not to be approached about my physical appearance or to be objectified by sexist men. The eroticization of women's physical appearance is a way of exercising power over women. It silences women's professional attributes as their physical appearance becomes the subject. Unacceptable and misogynistic behavior. Think twice before sending another woman half your age such a sexist message. Charlotte. This is an example of asking one question and getting an answer to an entirely different one. He didn't ask her out. He didn't even call her beautiful. He said it was a stunning picture. Now, I'm looking at her picture. She looks older than 27, by the way. It's a nicely taken photo. Now, he claims he was talking about the professional quality of the photo. I don't know what his intentions were, and I don't particularly care. He's married, and he's a father of two. If he was hitting on some young lawyer online, that would be wrong from a marital perspective. It's not sexist, though. Men flirt, women flirt. If he's a cheater, that's one problem. I see no evidence to suggest he's actually a misogynist. Now, the woman he targeted is a human rights barrister who's studying for a PhD at Cambridge. So she's the two worst categories when you're dealing with someone that's going to blow an issue that is relatively inconsequential into a capital case. She specializes in so-called human rights, and she's a grad student at a university. So perhaps this is the wrong rock to try to lift over if you're trying to hit on someone. But what I find to be laughable is that this is a woman that's probably not used to handling male attention, so this is probably why she thinks maybe this is how I play hard to get. I don't know. But give me a break. This is not sexism. This is not misogyny. This is not objectification. This is someone being told on social media, and there's a reason you put a profile picture up on social media, because it contextualizes who you are, saying that is a nice photo. Do you realize how many times someone has told me that I look good in a photo? I once, a few months ago, I had Patrick Brown, who was campaigning then to be the leader of the PC Party of Ontario, on my show. And I've been working since September of last year, so almost a year now, to lose weight. And I've had some ups and downs in that time. And Patrick Brown came in studio to my radio station, interviewed him, and one of his people took a picture of us and posted it online. People commented. Dozens of people commented. Andrew, you look good. You've lost so much weight. Wow, looking good, Andrew. I didn't cry about being objectified. I found it kind of amusing. I'm like, well, no one's talking about me standing with the guy that's trying to be the next premier of Ontario. And this was before he won, by the way. But no, people were instead focused on my appearance. Oh, my goodness. I didn't cry. I didn't call them names. Sexist, misogynistic, those words wouldn't apply in this case. I didn't call them misandrists for objectifying me as a man based on my appearance. I didn't call them anti-fatites because they were focusing on the fact that I was once a fat person and now I have purpose and meaning and significance and relevance because I am now a skinnier person. No, I said thank you. I didn't try to make a capital case out of it, as these people who are supporting Charlotte Prudman haven't. She doubled down. She didn't just respond to his message on LinkedIn and call it quits. She also then tweeted about it, screenshotted it, and said how many women are contacted regarding physical appearance rather than professional skills. She doubled down in her comments later on. She says the eroticization of women's physical appearance is a way of exercising power over women. She mentioned that in her email, and it was extracted when later comments were given. He says his comments were misconstrued. He said most people post unprofessional pictures. My comment, which was unfortunately misinterpreted, was aimed at the professional quality of the photos. He says she's highly respected. She added him, by the way. She added him, and they don't have, as I understand it, a pre-existing relationship. So I wonder, what was she looking for with him? I don't know, and I don't particularly care. His wife apparently was spoken about when reached by phone, and she had never heard of anything and didn't comment on it. A spokesperson at his law firm said they apologized for the offense caused. But I don't think anyone here is actually offended. This is the problem. It's the era of faux outrage. You gain more by saying you're offended by something than you do by doing anything else. It's like an instant advertisement. Now she gets to say that she's the human rights lawyer that spoke truth to power and fought against the sexist, misogynistic advances by a lawyer nearly twice her age. This is now going to be her MO. Is the guy a pig or a lech? I don't know. I can't say one way or another. But if we base what he is and who he is based on his comments alone and not external factors, which is what her comments were responding to, she's just someone who needs to learn to shut up. But no, instead she decides to campaign, say this highlights wider sexism in the legal profession perpetrated by other legal professionals. His motives are sexist. He shouldn't be allowed to use LinkedIn. She said LinkedIn needs a firm stance. Other lawyers said it was very worrying, called it inexcusable sexism. I still don't see it. Because his comment could be said to a man. Maybe this word stunning wouldn't be used, but incredible picture. Spectacular picture. And I don't think that would be it. And here's the thing. Let's say that he is, in fact, a cheater or a flirt. Not necessarily a cheater. Maybe he's one of those, I'll just talk to a bunch of young women and that's that. Not that that's excusable, but let's say that was the case. Does that make him a sexist or does it make him a bit of a pig? Because I don't think that the two necessarily have to go hand in hand. I think it's quite possible, and in fact, probable, that this could be an example of him sending out a little trial balloon. If she's not interested, she says, I appreciate your compliment. I look forward to discussing my skills as a lawyer with you. He ends it, or she ends it right there. If he wants to advance, then maybe she has a claim that he can't take the hint. But she's given him no reason to correct the record. She's given him no excuse or no opportunity to correct the record. Instead, she's basically made it seem like he's the bad guy here without any other context. And I find that to be disgusting, but all too unsurprising in the age where political correctness, like I mentioned a few moments ago, accomplishes more than actually having a substantive argument. If she genuinely feels maligned, first off, this is not the type of reactionary that I would ever want representing me. Actually, maybe in a lawsuit, I might want that. Maybe this is just one big commercial for her future practice, because now she recognizes that she can prove to people that she's okay making a mountain out of a molehill and winning the side of the argument. I don't know what her end game is here. It's possible that we just don't do a good enough job in the legal profession in the Western world separating the professional victims from those who want to offer something sensible to the profession. But when push comes to shove, what is this saying about culture? So remember when I mentioned that I could find one of these stories every day. Well, the reason that this is so important to speak out against is because of the commonality of this, because of the sense of normalcy that I think these things present to us. That's why I think this is something that more people need to pay attention to, even if it's something that almost gets to the point of obnoxiousness and us being able to say, oh, yet again, the outrage of the day, the outrage du jour. You know, if I ever had a daily show, well, I do have a daily show. If I ever had, like a daily TV show, I would devote probably, or could devote, a couple minutes at the end of every show to talking about the outrage of the day. And the reason I don't do it on my radio show is because I try to instead work it into other topics, work it into bigger picture narratives. And this is what I love about a podcast as well, especially, is that I really get to focus on a longer version, a more in-depth discussion about any of the issues that I take on. But the reason I say that is because we're dealing with something here where punchlines have become the headlines. Stories that used to be, the filler you'd put in at the end of the paper just to end on a lighter note, the stories that could have been the sidebars, have now become the bigger picture headlines that need to have the 500 to 600 word articles attached to them. Someone being offended by something is now considered news. Someone being offended by something is now considered a story worthy of the New York Times, worthy of the Chicago Tribune, worthy of newspapers that, regardless of their political bent, once used to be a little bit more discriminating when it comes down to what is actually newsworthy. No, hurt feelings is now a case of breaking news. And if that doesn't terrify you about the next generation in a way that nothing else can truly encapsulate. I mean, this is the era where no one can play outside because they might get a little bit of a boo-boo. This is the extension of that, where if someone does get an emotional boo-boo, it's a front-page story. This is why human rights commissions in Canada exist. Because your feelings are other people's business now, not just your own. Welcome to 2015. It's not exclusive just to Canada. We've got to take a quick break here for Lawton Online. When we come back, I will try not to offend anyone, but if I do, well, tough luck. You're stuck with me. That's coming up in just a couple of moments here on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. We'll be right back.
It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, only on Lawton Online. Scouring every corner of the globe for stories so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved.
Welcome back to the final few moments here on Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. You heard the man. It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, scouring every corner of the globe from Newmarket to Nauru, from Toronto to Tonga, finding the stories so outrageous there must be a liberal involved. And today we actually go to Navajo County, which is in Arizona, where a 24-year-old or 23-year-old Phoenix resident by the name of Christian Reese saw the difficult way why it's never a good idea to rely on technology. You see, he was bragging about a double safety feature on his handgun. He was also drunk. He had been with 6 of his friends on Tuesday of last week bar hopping. The bars closed around 2 to 3 in the morning. They decided to go to the countryside and shoot guns, which, I'm going to be prepared to say right then was probably when things went off the rails. And then one of them was talking about how cool it was that his gun had a double safety feature, so he decided to demonstrate it. The double safety feature is supposed to be a 2-stop mechanism that prevents a gun from firing, and he demonstrated this while the gun was pointed to his head, and the safety didn't even seem to be enabled. So according to the Phoenix New Times, he held the gun up to his head, he pulled the trigger, he dropped to the ground. They called for help. The fire station was 2 miles away. His friends ran away. So you know you've got good friends when they won't even stick by you when you shoot yourself in the head. They attempted to treat him, and he is still, at this time anyway, in critical condition. You know, I talk a lot about gun rights and whatnot and how I'm a supporter of them, but when push comes to shove, you can't fix stupid. I'm pretty sure Darwin had a rule named after him about this. So I think it's safe to say that when you try to demonstrate the feature of a gun after a night of drinking, and when you show such a disrespect and lack of knowledge in guns, I think it's safe to say you must be a liberal. There's really no other way. Listen, we got to wrap things up on the program in just a moment here, but I wanted to promote, if you haven't seen it yet, a phenomenal video and must-see video that my boss, Ezra Levant, did earlier this week on exposing one of the biggest problems, I think, in the election campaign that not a single voice in the mainstream media has covered, and that is the membership of 6,000 journalists in Canada in a union that's registering, that's lobbying, basically, for and against political parties. And that is the Canadian Media Guild, which is on the third-party advertiser list alongside 24 other organizations in Canada, which says they can run attack ads, promote candidates, etc., basically operate as though they're a political party. But I think every group should have the right, if they want to run ads, to do it. But when you are a group that is priding itself, at least ostensibly, on your objectivity, I don't buy that this is a right you have. And what Ezra didn't mention in the video is that beyond the actual Media Guild, there's also Unifor, Canada's biggest trade union, which also counts a media division that includes, for example, a lot of the post-media reporters. So I think that there is a very big problem here. I'm all for people being members of unions if they want to. I'm all for private sector unions, and I'm all for people that are not funded by taxpayers engaging in the political process. But I also believe in honesty and transparency. And I've not seen a single disclosure from one of the journalists covering Stephen Harper, nor even Kathleen Wynne at a provincial level, nor Justin Trudeau or Thomas Mulcair at the other party levels federally, disclose their membership in a union that has skin in the game. Talk about dishonesty. We got to take a break until next week on TheRebel.media when Lawton Online resumes. My name's Andrew Lawton. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon, Canada.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out TheRebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.